Testing.
Hi, everybody. Happy Startup Week. My name is Dave Mayer. I'm the CEO of Technical Integrity. We are a boutique placement firm focused on building engineering and executive teams for startups. And I'm also a big community builder. Been part of Denver Startup Week, Boulder Startup Week since year 2 on each. This happy 11th, I suppose, Denver Startup Week. And just wanted to welcome our featured guest. This is Beata. Well, I guess we can start with, how do you pronounce your name?
The best question. It's technically Beata, but I respond to anything that sort of sounds like my name.
And how about your last name?
Puncevic.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with the family history. You have a super interesting family history and how you got here and your path to CTO.
All right. So I don't know if it's really interesting. I feel like my story is so common. I first generation immigrant in the US. I've been here for quite some time now, though. It's been, I don't know, I keep forgetting if it's like 20 years or 20 something years. My mom keeps correcting me on a regular basis. But I grew up in Lithuania. I am Russian and Polish by heritage. And I spent most of my childhood before moving to the United States between Lithuania and far, far Siberian Russia, in a place that I'm pretty sure no one here has ever heard of. And moved here when I was a teenager. Went to school here. When I was in high school, I did not even know that computer science was a thing you could go to school for. I don't know if that was ignorance on my part or just that it was that long ago, but I chose to go to school for finance. I think in some ways it's inevitable I ended up in tech because I've always had a deep love for math. As a little kid, like I broke it already. Okay, there it goes. Just as I was saying, I do tech stuff. I don't do AV. I will say that right now. Software. Anyways, and so I thought that finance was like the practical application of math that I could support my family with, and I went to school for that. I never worked in it. I serendipitously fell into technology and very purposefully pursued a multitude of technical domains over the course of my career. Started with cybersecurity. I don't really recommend starting that way, but that's what happened to me. And sort of grow into infrastructure, data centers, the kind that have server rooms and stuff, not the kind that we all work with now. Architecture, data engineering, and then web app development. And really, probably midway through my career, I realized that I really liked the leadership aspect of it, the people leadership aspect of it. So in some ways, it was probably inevitable I ended up in a CTO role just because really being able to achieve results through others, through teams, was a big part of what is interesting for me. So that's my story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe we go back briefly to your experience at Healthgrades. Sure. It seems like obviously that likely informed a lot of the work you're doing now.
Yeah, so Healthgrades was such a great job. Before Healthgrades, I spent a very long time working in healthcare, in the insurance space, and I was very passionate about trying to, through technology, through data, create a world where people can make better healthcare decisions on their own. Like the traditional model where the doctors make all the decisions for you and you're supposed to sort of trust them blindly and you don't really have a part to play in those decisions, has always really troubled me. And I, from the inside out, try to change the healthcare industry very slowly, as anything in the healthcare industry is, and ended up with this opportunity at Healthgrades, which is a company that helps you find doctors and helps you find hospitals, right? So it was sort of like tailor-made and perfect for what I was really passionate about. And I got to move to Denver. I'd never been to Denver before I came here to interview for my last job. And now that I've been here for however many years, I can't imagine living anywhere else. But that was a really interesting opportunity. I really got, I think, embedded in the Denver ecosystem, the tech ecosystem here. A lot of folks who work with me before work with me again now at Techstars. because there's such a tight-knit technical community here that I really appreciate and hope to be a part of for a very long time. And I spent 3 or 4 years there, and then Techstars sort of again came into my vantage really by accident.
So let's zoom in on that a little bit. What was it about Techstars that was compelling and as a potential next step?
Yeah, it was an interesting choice because I'm the first CTO at Techstars. So there's been sort of other technical leaders in the past, but Techstars, if you guys know who we are, hopefully, probably a lot of you already do, has been around for a long time and has been growing sort of, to some extent, I think it started to grow by accident. And we really got to a point where we needed to invest in software and in data, but it was not clear how and why. Honestly, I made the choice because I met the team, and I remember thinking, well, I'm not entirely sure what this job was going to be, and I don't know if they're entirely sure what they want from me, but I'd like to figure it out together. So David Brown, a previous CEO, a lot of the folks on the executive team that are still there that I work with, just extraordinary humans. And I really was yearning for truly a mission-driven company, like a company that it's not just, a statement on a website or things that you print on postcards. It's a thing that actually drives what we do every day. And that's so true to the ethos of Techstars, the mission that everyone is there for, and it's really authentic. And 2.5 years later, I feel even more that way than I did. A lot of times you find out what the real place looks like, and you're like, oh, that's not really real. And it's even more so than I could imagine. And so, honestly, it was the mission and it was the people. I had very little understanding what the job will actually look like.
And so, obviously, Give First is so sort of central to what you stand for. I mean,
Yeah.
Obviously, we built Give First and the ethos into our DNA as an organization as well, just after seeing how impactful it was in community building and bringing people together. Basically, it's give of yourself and of your time without any expectation of anything in return, right? It's super simple. But from your perspective, was it Give First in particular that brought you, or was it really just sort of the global vision and sort of all of the above?
Yeah, I don't think that, if I'm honest about it, I don't think I even appreciated what Give First means when I took the job. It was the mission and the vision, right? So at Techstars, we believe that entrepreneurs make the world a better place. It's really just that simple, and everyone believes that. And our job is to make those dreams actually become successful businesses. And we believe that the ideas are everywhere. And as someone who didn't grow up here, who has a pretty diverse background, I am convinced of that being the case. So the idea that we can actually improve the things that we do across the globe by creating this engine that helps entrepreneurs create successful businesses. Can you think of a cooler job than that? I legitimately can't. There's nothing else I could do with my skill set that will make a bigger impact in my lifetime on the world around me than this job.
Can you give a sense for the size and scope of technology and the organization itself? Obviously, started in Boulder, Techstars started in Boulder, but now it's literally global. So can you give a sense for maybe your understanding of where it started and where you're headed?
So Techstars overall is 300 and change employees right now. That does not include many teams who are local in the various accelerators. So it's bigger than that. If you add all that up, there's probably another couple hundred associates who make accelerators a reality on top of that. The engineering team is about 60 people. I don't know exactly where it started before me. When I started, it was, I think, less than 15. Most of their time was spent on sort of just really trying to keep the ship afloat. Just because imagine a business that grows without much investment in technology, and all of a sudden you have all this stuff like wired together with rubber bands, and everything is breaking all the time. And we invest in hundreds of companies per year. So right now we make, over 500 investments per year. that's just the accelerator investments for companies that go through our programs. We make thousands of follow-on investments in those companies. So you can't do that with Excel spreadsheets, like not at scale. So things were pretty challenging back then. I don't know how big we'll grow, and exactly at what pace. The vision for Techstars is pretty ambitious. So in 2019, the year before I started like right before the pandemic kicked in, and I don't think those things are related, but it was not good timing. 2019, I think we had 40 accelerators. Next year we'll have like 60 something, and that's just the beginning of growth. We have pretty ambitious goals to grow across the globe. We'll have an accelerator in Lagos this year, in Riyadh. Singapore has been around for a long time, and that's all over Europe and the United States. So I imagine we'll continue to grow. Exactly what that path looks like. No one's ever done VC at scale, so not like what we envision. So there's not like a playbook that I can follow and say, oh, this is exactly what it'll look like, but it'll be interesting.
And so what are some of the things you're most excited about with regards to the technology standpoint and sort of making this sustainable growth over time?
Yeah, so personally, I'm a data geek. A lot of my technical background has been in data engineering and data platforms. As you can imagine, we have access to incredibly interesting data across the entire life journey of a startup, from an idea, from a startup weekend or a startup week, all the way up through unicorn and growth and so on. So it's very interesting to me how we can use that to actually help earlier stage CEOs grow their businesses by leveraging insights from this global opportunity and access that we have to data. So that's just really fascinating. What does that look like exactly? Maybe it looks like in us being able to source investments better. Maybe it looks like us helping make better connections to CEOs in their network. That's just going to be a very interesting asset for us to leverage to help all of the startups in our portfolio. The second thing is our network. So Techstars has an insane network. Thousands of mentors, thousands of founders, investors, et cetera. And because we are so distributed, we've never been excellent at bringing that network together into a common place. So there may be the Seattle sort of area or the Boston area or the Boulder area, but being able to weave that local and global fabric into one network is just, there's friction. It's there, but accessing it has a lot of friction. We just launched a new platform for all of our entrepreneurs in beta to actually come together and collaborate and be able to reach the global mentor, investor, and founder network that we have access to. That's really exciting. I think that's going to make a big difference for everyone who is part of the Techstars family.
So you joined in 2020, obviously some strange times. 2021 was boom time for a lot of organizations, Techstars included, and then now we're, whatever, call it a market correction, call it a recession, call it whatever you like. What are some of the big lessons learned here in the past couple of years?
Is something going on with the economy? I haven't Yeah, 2020 was crazy, right? You sort of start a new job, and all of a sudden you're like, well, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. And then 2021, I think January, our current CEO, Maël Gavet, joined, and we sort of refreshed the strategy, set these ambitious growth targets. I built an entire team in 2021 without meeting most of them in person. So the 60 people that we currently have, the majority of those folks were hired in 2021 during all of the sort of interesting times that are going on. There's so many lessons learned. I don't even know, where to start.
Yeah,
Where do you want to start?
What's the top one? What's the first one?
So it's interesting. I got to see David, our previous CEO, try to help us navigate through really uncertain pandemic times, and then I get to see my current boss, Maël, lead the company through all the crazy things that are happening right now. One lesson for me personally is that, I think when I was younger, I really thought that you have to put like a facade at work if you want to be a senior leader. You can't be an authentic self. You have to, transparency. I'm a very transparent person, and transparency was always frowned upon from sort of my previous career experiences. So I never thought I would be a senior leader because I'm like, I swear, I say too many things that I probably shouldn't say, and it's just not not meant for me. Thankfully, I think I'm wrong about that, or was wrong about that. And watching David and watching Mayel lead the organization through really uncertain, challenging times with grace, with authenticity, with transparency, with vulnerability even, really just, I don't know, it makes me believe that there's hope for the world, you know? It's all going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's super unique to be part of a global organization with, at least 2 C-levels that are female, right? And
yeah, we have a bunch. I've stopped counting
right.
a while ago. There's like half of the executive team is women, I'm pretty sure.
Right. And you feel like aside from the authenticity, the vulnerability, what are some of the other core attributes of that come out of that?
It's hard for me to judge because I've never been anything other than a woman. So I don't know what the alternative looks like. I mean, legitimately, it's an interesting question. I do believe that like my team is 36% women, which is very, very good in tech. I pay close attention to that. I believe that diverse teams make better teams. And I think that's true at the engineering team level. I think that's true at the Techstars leadership team level. I think it creates for better teams. I think it creates for, not just female, male, all diversity of thought, experience, background creates for stronger teams. I think that's a fact at this point.
And how do you build strong remote teams? And to what extent do you create hybrid teams? To what extent do you guys meet up in Boulder or Colorado generally, or team building? What's really a robust team, a remote team look like?
Yeah, I'll say that the remote team experience of the last 3 years has been just a big, humbling experience. If I sat here and said, "This is how you do it," I would be lying. I don't think that I don't think there's some perfect formula for it. I've had distributed teams for a very long time before the pandemic, but distributed teams is not the same as teams who never meet, who are in completely different cities, completely different states. And I think that when everything started, I was like, we got this. Techstars is already global. Like, what's the big deal? Engineering teams have a huge advantage because we are used to working in ways that are structured. We have backlogs, we have stand-ups, we have a way of doing work, which a lot of other disciplines don't. So, we don't have to add 45 meetings to our calendar to know what someone did yesterday. Like, it's visible, it's transparent. I thought we had an advantage. So none of that really panned out that way. So imagine you can't get together in person. Everyone on the team is brand new. And all the other teams around you are changing too. So it's like a moving walkway and you're doing acrobatics on it at the same time. That's not even, how it feels. I think it's really important to remember that a remote team is not just a regular team with a lot of Zoom. I think it's really important to know that you have to do work differently if you want to be remote or hybrid or whatever. So for the first year and change, we did not get together in person. There is a part of Techstars employees that are here, so we had the opportunity to do so, but our office was closed. We closed the office down for a long time and so on and so forth. We just got together in May of this year for the first time as StaffCon, as a whole company, and that was the first time most of us met. It was like 3 hours of people going, "Oh my God, I had no idea you were that tall," and hugging each other. In the post-COVID world, it was the weirdest freaking experience ever. I think leaning into the fact that you have to write things down. You have to document a lot. You have to be structured in how you communicate. You have to allow teams to work asynchronously because you're not going to have the opportunity to just like run into each other in the hallway. Is all really important. But I don't think it's enough. I haven't yet figured out how you are a remote team that never gets together. Because the hardest thing for me has been, like, we know how to do work, we know how to build product asynchronously. But getting people to feel like a team when they've never met, that is really hard. Maybe there's a way of doing that. I don't know what that is yet. We've been experimenting with stuff. So we do like team events that are virtual. Like movie night, like we all watch the same movie kind of at the same time, and like we shipped everyone's snack boxes, and like it was a ton of fun. Like a bunch of that stuff is really, I think, makes a difference. But at the end of the day, if you don't feel connected to your organization and you've never met them in person, I think it's really hard to build those bonds. So I think ideally you get together every now and again, and I'm thankful that we can do that now, because I think we've lost a lot of that connection over the last 2 years, not being able to do so.
Are you guys pretty heavy on Slack versus Zoom? Is that sort of primary if you're working async?
So I only talk to people on Slack. Like, I've been texting you, and I'm like, this is weird. I broke my phone last week, and I only talked to my husband on Slack, so he hasn't been able to get a hold of me either. So yeah, we're very heavy Slack users. Zoom as well, absolutely. A bunch of other. The cool thing about Techstars, because we have 50 plus accelerators, a lot of them had to switch to being remote or hybrid during the pandemic. So it's like 50 experiments running at the same time on how do you do something remotely, right? So everyone tried different tools and different processes. So we can sort of innovate at a accelerated pace, because the 50 plus incubators all running simultaneously. So yeah, we're pretty heavy Slack. I have an allergy to email, so I try not to use it very much.
I noticed.
But, yeah, sorry.
It's not a problem. Let's talk about mental health a little bit, even for yourself, for your teams. You know, obviously at a bare minimum, for me, it's Zoom fatigue, right? It's just sort of like, good Lord, the world doesn't need another Zoom call, right? But obviously at a broader level, a more important level, how do you keep yourself sane, not burn out? Same for your team. You know, what's at the basis of that, and what are some of the tools that you help to employ?
Such a good question. I feel like everyone is really thinking about that right now. Personally, I have 3 dogs, which keep me very occupied, and I feel like having, whether it's your friends or your children or your family, as a anchoring point is everything, you know? But my personal sanity routine involves working out 6 days a week, and that's something I've kept to even throughout the pandemic, even when gyms weren't accessible and all of that, and reading a ton. So I spend a lot of time reading both fiction and nonfiction, often, most of the time, unrelated to work. And it really helps me connect the dots in my brain and really look at the world in a different way. So that's what I personally try to do. My team, I mean, I think there's an interesting question, like, what responsibility do I have as a leader in caring for their mental health? And what is my ability to affect it, right? There's some stuff that's really obvious, which is you want to create the kind of culture where people can just take a day off and take the space that they need and have the safety, psychological and otherwise, to feel like they can just do that. And I think Techstars is a place like that. But we've been doing some other things as well. So we did something this past summer called Summer Fridays. We gave people every other Friday off. As you can imagine, insanely popular in Colorado as a tactic. We introduced new benefits. We introduced meeting light Wednesdays. I was corrected earlier this week that it's meeting light, not no meeting Wednesdays. I thought there were no meeting Wednesdays, so I haven't been going. So we're trying to create, we're incredibly flexible on hours. So like the idea of like what time do you come into work or whatever, is not something that at least I worry about. It's interesting, a lot of the literature right now about how do you keep people productive and engaged is all about like tracking their productivity. Like there's all this stuff about like tracking people's keystrokes or whatever, I don't know. I guess that's a thing that you could do. My instincts are very much like the opposite way, which is the more you focus on outcomes and the more you enable people to work asynchronously, like someone may have an elderly parent living with them who requires care. Like you have to worry about that stuff now. You can't just pretend like, you know, they don't have a life outside of work. You have to create the kinds of schedules that allow people to care for all the things. Thankfully, Techstars is a place where we can do that. There's jobs where that's not possible, and we're incredibly privileged where we can. So we very much try to do things like that.
Let's shift a little bit to potentially folks who want to move into an executive level role, and or
Don't do
even
it.
sort of move up even from sort of pure engineer to engineering management, director, et cetera. Obviously you had a really unique path. What's some advice in 2022 that you would give to sort of aspiring technical leaders?
Recently we had a career path conversation with my team, with the engineers in my team about that, right? And I recommend, I think there's a history in tech that if you wanted to move up at all, you had to move into people leadership roles, because companies just did not have roles that were individual contributor but more senior. That wasn't really a thing. So I made sure that at least at Techstars, our jobs are designed where that is a thing, and you can continue to grow your career without choosing to go a people leadership path, because it's a different path. And it doesn't mean that the other path does not require leadership, but people leadership and people management is a different path. So first and foremost, I would say, don't do it if you think that's the only way to grow. It's not. And if you work at a place where that's the case, change that place or do something else. Because I don't think that people should go into people leadership unless that's actually a competency they want to develop. And if you are not sure, try before you buy. Talk to your manager, try it out, try it on a project, try it on a temporary basis. You may hate it, you may love it. We had a very excellent engineer this past year who called me, and said, I quit. And I said, why do you quit? Well, he's like, well, I don't want to be the people manager. I'm like, well, no one's making you do that, though. So we put him into a different role, and he's happier than he could ever be. So I guess I'm not really answering your question because I'm saying how to not do it. But
that was the next question.
but if you do want to do it, I'm sure there's different paths. For me, I think the combination is you need a T-shaped technical skill set, which means that you need to have enough exposure to various domains, technically, and depth in one or more of them. So if you don't have that, seek that out. That's what I did. I purposefully sought out areas of technical domains that I did not have. And to, at least I think, and I could be entirely wrong and full of crap, but I think that to lead a team that does stuff, you need to understand what that is to some degree of depth. So make sure that your technical skill set is rounded out. The second component is the people leadership path, which starts small. It's a completely different thing altogether. What it is will change when it's a team of 10, a team of 50, a team of 100, or a team of 200. Your job will change radically at every one of those levels, and each time you should think about it as a new job. Third is business acumen. So to be a leader in whatever industry or business you're in, you are now a player with your peers, and you have to develop that. I've switched industries 3 times now, I think, maybe 4, and each time is a big learning curve, and that's something you want to lean into. It's not going to, I don't think, magically just through osmosis descend upon you. You have to put in the work. So every time you make that leap, it's like going back to school in a way. Like you have to put in the hours to get those competencies in. So I think of those as building blocks. That's how I would go about doing it, I think.
And it seems appropriate for Techstars in that you're a mentor-driven accelerator, incubator, right? Talk to us a little bit about some of the big mentors that you've had and the impact that they had on your trajectory.
I've been super fortunate in my career. I've had some excellent mentors and bosses that I worked with. I will remember one of them that I think really helped me build confidence early on, and I still keep in touch, obviously, with him till this day. And I was, 21, 22, working in this very conservative insurance space. Let's just say I did not fit in, like literally in any way. This is a place where you still have to wear a pantyhose to work, and I don't know, it was weird. I really, stood out in a way that was difficult. I was impatient. I was young. I didn't understand how things work. I didn't like how things work when I did understand them, and I didn't think that I should just accept that. And I kept getting feedback from my bosses that said, "You're awesome. You execute amazingly. You're so smart. You do all this stuff, but
Maybe a few less F-bombs.
Well, I don't even know if I was probably too scared to swear back then. But yeah, basically like don't, settle down. Don't be so impatient. Don't be whatever else. I forgot what it all was. And my boss told me, he was like, don't ever change. don't ever change. Keep doing what you're doing. It really meant a lot because he's incredibly successful. He is incredibly successful. I worked with him again at a different job, and sort of leaning into who you are. Like, I'm never going to be that person who's going to be patient. That's just not who I am. I can tone down the F-bombs or whatever, but I'm not, ultimately who I am is not going to change. And so what I did instead is I tried to change the ecosystem around me, and I tried to seek out jobs where that was an asset, not a detriment, right? And several times over, and I've actually had very few opportunities to work for women bosses, more so for men bosses. Again, being a woman in technology, it's probably not that uncommon. And I'm really grateful for, the leaps of faith that everyone took every time I made one of those jumps.
So we talk a lot about authenticity, about vulnerability. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable on mistakes.
Uh-oh.
Right. Just honestly, what's one of the larger mistakes that you've learned from in your leadership career? And perhaps, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I don't think that's a super invasive question. Just because I don't know. As a leader, you think about that all the time. Because at least I do. Maybe maybe I shouldn't. But I feel a tremendous sense of responsibility for my team. As humans, it's the thing that constantly sits on my shoulders. So whenever something doesn't go well, whether it's a failed project, or someone's unhappy, someone quits, or whatever, you just carry all that on you. So see earlier where I said, make sure you want to be a leader, because that's what comes with it. So I think one of the mistakes that I've made several times, and if I'm honest, I'll probably make it again, because it's so hard, even though I see it clearly in retrospect, is when I have someone on my team that I know isn't the right fit for the job, but they're crazy hardworking, really want to do well, really passionate about the business, the company, whatever. I take too long to make a change, and it really is not good for anybody, including mostly that person who is in a space where they can't be successful. I've made that mistake so many times over as a leader, and each time I feel like I learned from it, and I coach my own managers to say, okay, well, when you're 80% sure, just make a decision. It could be the wrong one, but you have to make a call anyway. And I do it myself all the time. I think that's a really big one for me that kind of tugs at me on a regular basis.
And do you have a bunch of engineering managers reporting to you that are doing the one-on-ones, and what does that sort of process look like?
Yeah, so I have 8 direct reports, which is kind of a lot, but it's not a giant team, and I don't like a lot of layers. But so they run their squads. They have just agile teams, super boring, normal product development structure. But I actually meet with all the people on my team. I try to do so once a quarter, so have one-on-ones once a quarter, just have a little bit of that FaceTime. Again, maybe in a non-pandemic, non-remote world, I would just see them in a cafe or something. Now it's much more purposeful.
Yeah, and the question is really sort of how do you start to understand that there's trouble brewing, right? And you might have to act.
Yeah, it's weird. I've gotten pretty good at picking up on little signals when I talk to each individual person one-on-one, and I'm also very good at spotting people's behavior on Slack or lack thereof. I think it's a weird sixth sense almost that I've honed, where I'm I think this person is sort of struggling a little bit. Maybe they need some help, and things like that. So I'm more right than I'm not,
So we'll open it up to questions here shortly, so please start to think about that. When we did our prep, we chatted a little bit about a question that Tim Ferriss put together around sort of type A personalities and high achievers. So I'll repeat it here, and I'd love your reflection. Type A personalities have goal pursuit as a default hardwiring. This is excellent for producing achievement, but also anxiety. You're constantly future-focused. I've personally decided that achievement is no more than a passing grade in life. It's a C+, that gets you limping along to the next grade. For anything more, and certainly anything approaching happiness, you have to want what you already have. Is it possible that everything is all right and everything is fine as it is?
Yeah, I read that a bunch of times when we chatted about that quote. Of course, I've seen it before in the 17 questions and whatnot. We all are products of our, circumstances, right? Me being a first-generation immigrant, my life hasn't always been super easy, and I stand on the shoulders of my mom and my grandmother who changed the world to give me the life that I have. Being future focused is like hardwired into me. Like I don't think that for most of my adulthood, the idea that there wasn't something to do next or to do better or to hustle harder, that wasn't even a thing that I could consider. So I don't know if this is what I think being able to think about, hey, can I just be satisfied with everything the way it is a real privilege. I think it comes from a real privileged place, which I think to a lot of people is not available and hasn't been available, and it's just like not an option. So it's a great question, and it's a great thing to think about. And I've been fortunate where I have been able to ask myself that question. But I also remember myself from a few years ago where that was a ridiculous question to me. Like the idea of not being focused on what you do next and what you do better. I think it comes with some privilege. At least it has for me in my lifetime. And before I had that, it was not possible. That being said, now where I am in life, I think that the real optimal way, for me at least, is to have the freedom and the security to decide where you want to go do that hustle. Not to have to do it everywhere all the time, right? Because it's not about, at least for me, not about not wanting to seek the improvement of not being future focused. It's about being in control of my own destiny. So can I make the choice about the thing that I want to improve at? And you can't do it all at the same time either, right? And if you are at a place of privilege where you can make those choices, it's a wonderful thing to have and to treasure, that you can sort of be picky about where to invest that additional energy or where to accept. The other thing I'll say is I think acceptance and being at peace with things is a real skill set, and I really struggle with it, and I try to practice it, but it's hard.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, the thing that I key in as well is being able to be present, even if it's, like you said, your six-day-a-week workout, right? You're hanging out with your dogs. Yes, there's always goals, stretch goals, etc. But if you do have the strategy, the morning routine, the sort of normal things to keep you grounded.
Magical morning routine.
Yeah, right. Going to open it up if you guys have questions. Yep, in the back. Well, there you go.
Just a quick question. So I'm going to use e-commerce as an example. Let's say that you're building an MVP, right, just to test it, get it out to users. It's very easy to use one of these like Shopify no-code technologies for the MVP. When would you suggest that someone switches from that into like building out the actual development team and having your own code?
That's such a great question. We think about this all the time because there's such a,
The thing I was just going to say, because it doesn't make sense for the MVP to, build out your own code, build this expensive thing when you can do it so cheaply and so easily with all these tools, right? And I use Shopify as an example because it's, good technology for e-commerce.
I mean, I think the short answer, is when you've validated that the idea has legs, it's probably the time to then decide, what portion of your product you want to actually have the control over and own the code. Because the biggest value of like one of those no-code tools is the speed to market, right? But it comes at a trade-off of not being able to customize things in any way that you want, build them in the way that you want, create things in the way that you want. So I think when you feel like you've validated the idea and you've understood the degree of investment that would be appropriate for that idea, that's the time to start thinking about. That doesn't mean that there's not a place permanently for some part of your product to be a tool like that, but things that are a core competency probably are going to be the things that you want to invest your own development in. And so it could be a combination of those things, but generally I think that's the time. I think the short answer is it depends on, so if it's a company whose product is more of a software product, I think it happens earlier. I think if it's a business that is maybe more software enabled and the core competency is something adjacent to that, it could happen a little later. So I think it happens different ways, but that's generally what I've seen.
Over here, please.
Yeah, during the previous, I guess, 2015 to 2019 startups, the continuous word that I haven't heard this week was exit. And I'm trying to get your opinion on if we go from the slowdown in IPOs, the instability in the overall investment market and stock market, your comment about happiness is accepting what you are. Should the medium size and getting larger founders become more aware that they could be at this for a while and it's okay, as opposed to getting that valuation to the roof, getting your team to sell out, and heading to Bermuda?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? How do you adapt to this current environment? I think what we see so far, and I'm by far not an expert in investment market trends, but what we see so far is that the deployment of capital is slowing down, right? Acquisitions and things like that are slowing down. So from everything that we've seen, I think companies that are going to survive this for now are the ones who really manage their cash flow, who really act aggressively to make sure that they have runway. I don't know if that necessarily means you have less ambitious goals. It just means that they are a little bit longer in their development. So I think in a time like this, focusing on profitability, focusing on runway, focusing on sustainability of your business, over burning cash to grow like crazy to get a crazy IPO valuation, that's probably what everyone is doing right now, and that's probably the way to sort of make it through this transition. Valuations are, I don't know what they'll look like on the other side of this, right? They were obviously really high before all this happened. People say it'll, even out. I guess we'll find out what happens afterwards. But you have to be around to find out what happens. And if you're not around, then, it's a moot point.
Please, go ahead.
I'm not in charge of the assigning of microphones. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
Just taking over.
It sounds like part of the strategy for Techstars to expand to so many places and build out this technical infrastructure is that it gives you the ability to churn through lots more data about the startups that you're incubating. So can you give us an example, just one example of something that Techstars has learned about how to better incubate startups that you may have found surprising?
It's such an interesting question. So I find everything surprising in this industry, to be honest. So as far as using data, we find that, whoa, sorry, was that me?
Nope.
We find that there's a few interesting things in how, when startups first apply to Techstars as an accelerator, and how we identify which ones are a fit for an accelerator, a specific one or not. So we find that a lot of companies apply to more than one program, and they're not entirely sure which one is best for them. And by looking at sort of their thesis, their description of the company, we can actually help match them with a better program that perhaps will help them be more successful. And it may not be as obvious, because a lot of it could be like, oh, I want to be in this location or whatever, but it may be the language of M&D. It may be a specific experience or the network strength. It may be the specific problem you're going after. So if you're particularly struggling with fundraising, as an example, we may want to match you with an MD who has that particular experience, as opposed to if you're just have a dream and an idea and a pitch deck, that maybe there's a different fit. So part of the global advantage is that we have the diversity of skills and experiences that our managing directors bring that can actually help, in a data-driven way, align the best kind of need with the best kind of program. I mean, that's at a meta level. There's so many little ways, and how do you value your company? How do you find talent? How do you price talent? If you want to hire an engineer, how much should you pay? How should you maybe go after doing research and analysis? So all of those things are, the network that we have access to allows us to sort of tap into that holistically.
Love that. Here in the front.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Curious, what would you want to hear from the standpoint of like building or growing your team? What would you want to hear from someone who had worked really focused and intentionally in tech for like 15 years, even as like a CTO of smaller startups, smaller teams and organizations, and then taken off like a gap year to travel, and was now coming back looking at potentially moving into a different function with maybe a larger team or organization, like an engineering manager or a director, right? To go from being an executive to then having time off to then going back into the space in a different capacity.
Are you asking for a friend?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely asking for a friend.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, what would be a compelling narrative there?
Well, as far as the gap years and all that, at least from my experience, I just tell the truth. I think those are great. So I think the biggest challenge, somebody going from like being a CEO of a startup to now being an engineering manager at a bigger company, is the scope of responsibility. So we find often that engineers who only worked in startups, who maybe want to go for a company that's a little bit bigger, end up really struggling with the fact that they can't just decide what they want to work on every day. They don't get to do everything. Their scope becomes more and more specialized, and obviously there's degrees of that. So what I would want to hear from somebody who was interested in that is something that signals to me understanding of that transition, and that's a transition they actually want to embrace. Because I've had plenty of engineers who worked for Techstars when it was much smaller, and then when we became a little bigger and their focus became a little bit narrower, that was just not something they wanted to do, and they wanted to go be in another startup environment, which is amazing, and we fully encourage that, obviously. We have a lot of jobs in our network, but I think that's the biggest change that is psychologically hardest to overcome. So if someone was thinking about that, I'd really ask them to consider if that's something that they actually are like interested in doing, and if that's exciting to them.
Yep. And I would probably just add to that, if it's a pure engineer, is it, from a hands-on perspective, has that individual, your friend, been, brushing up on the latest JavaScript frameworks, or really just completely checked out for the year, right? Sort of depends on the role. Yep. Please.
Yes, what are your thoughts on providing technology for the startup, either through the incubator or overall, for basic accounting, basic inventory, basic CRM, basic manufacturing, those kind of things?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So the question is, does Techstars think about providing technical solutions to the portfolio companies that are in our portfolio? We are thinking about it. Right now, our strategy is a little bit different, and that is we find the companies that do that thing really well, whether it's HR, GL, finance management, cap table management, et cetera. We partner with them to get you a good deal, get you a discounted deal. So like, for instance, we partnered with 3 different cap table vendors last year to get highly discounted deals for portfolio companies to be able to leverage their software. We then integrate with them from a data perspective, so we have all the sort of data insights as a result of that, but we didn't go out there and build our own cap table software. Our thinking about that is that there's so many technologies in the stack that startups use, and there's excellent people in our own even ecosystem. So in the Techstars portfolio, there's companies who do those things well. So instead of us, maybe building 10 new products, we can potentially provide a lot more value faster by just getting you access to those products that already exist. That's not to say that we don't never do it. I think that in the longer term, The answer to that is maybe, but at least in the foreseeable future, our focus is to find the best HRISs, the best cap table vendors, the best finance systems, and to help you get access to those that are at rates that you wouldn't be able to do so on your own through the negotiating power that Techstars has.
Very cool. And here in the front as well.
Hello, just wanted to say thank you for being here. Really curious, kind of to piggyback off of the last question. So what is the, or is there a team within Techstars that is working on the almost future technologies that we don't currently have in the stack that support the startups at this current stage? Because we're already there in the same playing field. But as Web 3.0, blockchain, and so on, and keeps advancing, there's going to be new layers of support needed for some of those companies. Is Techstars at all working on future technology to help when the time is right to implement those technologies with those startups?
So we have a couple of threads that are in early stages when it comes to that. One is we look for partners in our portfolio of startups who maybe are doing something like that, and see if we can work with them together to bring that capability to the rest of our portfolio. The second flavor is really around data insights. So we want to be able to turn the data that we have holistically, obviously aggregated, de-identified, et cetera, into products for our CEOs, our portfolio companies as well. So I don't know exactly what it will look like 2-3 years from now, but for the next year or two, our focus is primarily on looking for really innovative, like Web3 is a great example. We have a ton of Web3 companies graduating from accelerators that I think if we have the right partnership with them, we can actually bring that as a value add to the rest of the portfolio and not necessarily go out and just build something from scratch on our own.
I'll ask one in the meanwhile. A lot of times, younger engineers come to us and say, how do I get experience? Or folks coming from non-technical disciplines or non-traditional backgrounds, and by and large, people come to us to build experienced engineering teams. So I do my best to give some career advice to some of these folks coming out of code camps, and they're basically, you can't blame them. They're like, how am I supposed to get experience if you won't give me experience, right? So what's some of the best advice you would give to folks in that situation?
I think it's easier than ever now to be able to do that, and the reason is that if you don't have any experience, if somebody who wants to get into engineering doesn't have any experience from a professional perspective, just go out there and build something. It doesn't really matter what it is. You can get AWS.
Put it up on GitHub?
Yeah, you can just post it on GitHub in your resume, put your repo. We will 100% look at it. We'll almost look at nothing else if you post your Git repo up there, and we will see what you did. And if you've been committing a lot, if you're passionate about it, it's clear, it's evident in what you post, right? It doesn't really matter if it's good or bad. That's not really the point. The point is if you're doing stuff and you are investing the elbow grease in that, build something. It's easier than ever to get a server from Amazon. It's easier than ever to build anything. It could be, something that you need to, manage your kitchen. It doesn't matter what the thing is. It doesn't have to be super creative. And just put that on your resume, and we will 100% look at it.
Please, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. That wasn't my question, but I fit into that category, so thanks for asking that. My question is, I'm not very familiar with how Techstars evaluates the value prop of the investments, but in terms of a capital return for investments versus a value add for a community, are there any shifts or changes in how people are thinking about investments, and if it's solely based on the capital return or some other metric? I know that a business has to be profitable, make money to thrive and continue to grow. But I'm curious if there are other metrics that Techstars considers in terms of an impact of a certain community that's maybe underserved, or how to, with the give first model, support a community that can help grow the network effect, and overall I think the rising tide lifts all boats, but not all boats benefit the same way from a development in technology. So I'm curious if there are different metrics in how success is evaluated over time that's not necessarily just capital focused, and hopefully that was clear enough.
I mean,
of a
we
question.
invest in such early stage companies that, and it takes so long to find out whether or not it was a good choice. 7 to 10 years to see returns. So I think that the idea of whether or not you can sort of just look for these indicators and know that you chose correctly, it's a little bit far-fetched still, especially since early stage startup returns are it follows the power law, so very few make up most of the returns over the long term. So Techstars specifically, we prioritize in the selection process the team very heavily, more so than product, more so than market. So even each individual managing director will make those decisions differently, but they prioritize the team. So does the team work together well? Do they know each other? Do they have strong bonds? Have they built stuff together before? Do they have good relationships? Is there a complete team? So you typically won't get into a Techstars program if it's just one person. You are looking for a team. So we over-index on the right people, because even if the startup fails, the odds are the next one will be more successful. So I don't know if there's a change to that, though, with regard to what's happening now. I think our strategy is still pretty solid when it comes to how we think about who to add to the network. As far as various geographic markets, we are pretty distributed. But obviously analysis goes into that, right? We go to markets where we think there's enough of an ecosystem to actually invest in.
I think this is the last question. I'm going to give you an opportunity to just give some final thoughts on path forward, the rest of 2022, going into 2023. What would you like the audience to know? Final thoughts here.
Final thoughts. Can I be selfish and say we're hiring? If you know anybody who wants to work with founders and do amazing things that change the world, please come talk to me.
Me too.
And me first.
How about a round of applause?